Sorry. It should be obvious when you look back.
I'm just checking. Did you register?
The power of connection, of networking, of sharing ideas, that's what's taking place here. We didn't come here with a fixed solution. We came here with open minds and open hearts, but united on some very basic principles. And I got into politics accidentally, and some of you know this already. It feels a bit like Back to the Future. There was a time when there was a terrible war being unleashed, a war paid for by our taxpayers' money, a war where we were told you're either with us or against us, and you're an extremist if you dare to question even, our country going into war. And that was more than 20 years ago, the Iraq War. And Muslims then, just as now, were being demonized as a problem community, the problem, the state, the threat to the state, threat to democracy, all those stereotypes about extremism. And it's depressing, can't deny it, to see it all being churned again. But some things have changed. Some things have changed. When we were building that anti-war movement at the start, it took us months and months to get the kind of mobilisations that we've seen in literally weeks. When we started the anti-war movement, it took so much effort to simply convince people that it's important to protest. And it was very rare to see anybody resign their councillships the way we're seeing now. So we're seeing far more organising, we're seeing far more mobilising of young people, and with the advent of social media, we're not just relying on the so-called mainstream media narrative. And that's what's actually scaring the likes of Sunak and Starmer. They're terrified. They are the ones who are terrified of actual democracy. They talk about British values, they talk about democracy. But when they have democracy in their face, which is just peaceful protesters, grandmas, parents, kids, Jewish people, atheists, Christians, and yes, dare I say it, Muslims, coming out and saying, please can you not bomb innocent children to shreds? Suddenly, the genocide's about them. It's not about Palestinian kids being killed. It's about them being scared that they might get somebody on Twitter saying they don't agree with their vote. That somebody on the streets is using their very legitimate right to peacefully ask them to do the decent thing. I think it's disgusting that we need people on the streets to do this. I think it's disgusting that democracy is being taken away from us, from the very people who are there to uphold democracy. And the idea of this Rishi Sunak, who's not been elected by anybody in the country actually, giving us lessons on democracy. And you know, when you see International Women's Day and you see them going in the United Nations and you see them preaching around the world about human rights, freedom of speech, isn't Putin terrible because there's no real freedom there? All of that stuff. And yet when we have it in real time, this is the response. And the contempt they show people. And I say this as a visible Muslim. Yes, we're on the front line, but we're kind of the proxy. We're the canary in the mine. What they say about us has now been extended to the left. And we saw it with what happened with the Corbyn movement. Because the real threat is the unveiling, the unmasking, the truth coming out. And the Overton window which they want to impose on every one of us about what is acceptable, what we have to put up with, whether it's student fees, whether it's the privatisation of the NHS, and whether it's these unethical wars. They're saying there is no alternative. We will call you names, we'll call you racist if you stand up for human rights. We know the score. Some of us have been through this. And so the positive message, the empowering message, and I think this is, again, the purpose of today. And this is something that we did. The session right now is about lessons that we learned. Yes, I'm proud that I was one of the founder members of Respect. Because it was the same moment. I told you it's a bit like Back to the Future. You know, we'd got the people on the streets, But they didn't care after a point because they could just get voted back in. There was no other levers. And then that discussion happened. What do we do? And I was one of the people who said, well, let's just go for it. And it wasn't easy, but we did achieve some significant results. We've got councillors in London, in Birmingham, in Bradford. And yes, George Galloway got elected. So we know it works. There was weaknesses, and maybe there's other times you can discuss what those were and the lessons we learnt from that. But actually, there is a model. And when I went and stood, as a quite novice in that time, how we won was this. No shortcuts. We knocked every door. For me, it was an educative process. For me, but also for our constituents to be able to share that message. It wasn't just vote for me. It was, do we know this is happening in our name? Do we know there are things we can do about it? These are the issues on our doorsteps, but also what's happening in our name and literally killing people abroad. And it was that painstaking, difficult, but empowering educative process, which I think helped us have those real wins. And the fact that we were aligning with people, it wasn't just shouting at people, it wasn't just telling them that they're wrong. It was going with them where their pain is, and whether it's youth cuts, whether it was keeping a local swimming pool open, all those everyday issues. And it got to the point that although I was only one councillor, we managed to get a cross-party resolution and agreement to actually boycott states which used weapons in an illegal way. Which is why now we're getting all this pushback, on the BDS stuff. Because they know that when people start to think, when people start to work together, when some of the mask kind of comes down, that's what real people power is. And that's what they're afraid of. So for me, yes, it's sickening, but it's actually a mark of the strength of our movement on the streets and the threat of electoral wins. And what George Galloway has done in Rochdale in a few weeks has demonstrated viscerally, tangibly, that hypothetical question that many of us have had, that given the anger, the frustration, the hurt, the distress, the pain that people in this country are feeling not heard, feeling locked out, feeling not represented, can we harness that in an electoral context, given that this 2024 is a general election year? And the answer from the people of Rochdale has been a resounding yes. And the fact that George Galloway got not just a victory, but a resounding victory, the fact that the person who came second had a very substantial vote, the appetite for independent candidates is there. So the message from this place now is that go forth, organise, with confidence, with empowerment. Take heart from the people in this room. Take heart from the example of Rochdale. There is a victory to be won, which is not just about this year, but about coming generations. Thank you.